Welcome to the dynamics of everyday life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the dynamics of everyday life. Today I'm delighted to welcome another guest to the show, Vicky Quinn Fraser. Vicky is a non-fiction book coach and also an author herself of many titles. I had an absolute blast talking to Vicky about why we might like to write a book, what gets in our way, how we can help ourselves, and I hope you enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed recording it. So welcome back to the show, everyone, and today I'm very excited to welcome another guest to the show. Today we have Vicky Quinn Fraser on, and Vicky is a non-fiction book coach, and she's also the creator of MicroBook Magic. And I'm sure there's lots of other stuff that you've done, Vicky. In fact, I know there's a lot of other stuff that you've done. So, do introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, thank you for having me, Julia. A lot of other stuff that I've done. Yes, 35,000 ideas a second, and I try and do about half of them at once, which is just not tenable. But yeah, I am a non-fiction coach and creative writing coach. I help people to write books, which I absolutely love because my shelves are stuffed with the most incredible books written by people that just on topics that you just never have thought could become a book, or most people would never have thought they could become a book. But I'm like, anything can be a book if you're interested enough in it, and if you're interested in it, then somebody else will be interested in it. So yeah, writing. I'm also a writer, author of my own books as well. I love writing. It's like breathing to me. I feel weird if I haven't done it. And yeah, just a bunch of other stuff as well. I'm a trapeze artist. I teach trapeze and pole dancing in my spare time. As you do, I've been pole dancing for, I think, 20 years now, which is a very long time. We're renovating a cottage in the middle of a field. I've accidentally got 3 tiny sheep, got chickens, got cats, and I've got a husband who is the most patient man in the world.
I've accidentally got 3 sheep. I mean, we could do a podcast on that in itself. But what I really want to talk to you about today is because I am pretty much like, I suspect, a large percentage of the population in that I'd love to write a book. I just haven't got round to it. And I'm really keen to know what in your experience, what in your mind, what are the main blockers to people getting started?
That's a really good question. And if you ask most people, they'll say I haven't got time. And in a tiny minority of cases, that's true. And I'm not here to spout that usual, we've all got the same 24 hours in a day, because that is not true. I don't have children, for example. So I have more usable hours in my day than somebody who does have children. However, the vast majority of people who think they don't have time to write a book, it's actually not a time problem. It's a clarity problem usually, because just thinking, I want to write a book, but not really having any clear idea of exactly who it's for, what you want to say, what your big idea is, drilling down into that. If you're just thinking, I want to write a book, then of course you haven't got time. It's like if I'm like, I want to renovate my house, I don't have time to do that. That's a ridiculous thing to say. But if you break it down and figure out exactly what you want to achieve, where you want it to go, why you're doing it as well, why do you want to write a book? If it's just to tick off a box, then you're probably never going to make time for it. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is people thinking they don't have time, but actually it's usually a clarity issue.
That's a great point. And you see, now I'm thinking, because I'm thinking about myself here. It's in terms of the clarity, how much do you think people actually put off digging down into the clarity? Do you think it's a question stacking now, which as a coach, you never do? But I'm just wondering, is it a defense mechanism of people getting in their own way?
Possibly, yeah. Sometimes I think it is. I think there's a bunch of reasons why it happens. I think sometimes people have a lot of ideas and they don't know which one to go for. So they're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. And they don't do any of them because they don't give themselves space to do any of them because they've got, so many ideas going on. I think also there is a certain amount of a lot of people, especially women, are like, I don't really know enough to write a book. And so there's that kind of confidence thing, and which is just ludicrous, because when you think, anybody who is running a business, anybody who has been doing a job for more than a certain amount of time, has a vast store of knowledge and experience in their heads. And even the people who haven't been doing their thing for a very long time, you know more than somebody who hasn't done it at all. And as long as you're not positioning yourself as like the expert on top of the mountain, and this I think is probably the main thing, is like, so I've got off on a slight tangent, but I think this is the crux of it, is that we think of books still, rightly or wrongly, as being this like fount of the true knowledge, right? And I think that probably comes from religious texts like the Bible and things. Like the Bible was the truth back in the day, and there are still people who think that now. And so when you think of books like that, you think, oh, I need to know everything, I need to have all the answers to be able to write a book. And that's simply not true. Like, nobody has all the answers, no one book has all the answers. People have, there are some objective truths, but there are also my truth and your truth, and my experience and your experience. And so I think if we stop thinking of books as and you can apply this to all of the writing that you do as well. Like, if you stop thinking of yourself as like the expert on the mountain, and start thinking of yourself as having a conversation and joining a conversation, then that changes everything, because suddenly you don't have to be the person who knows it all, because nobody does. And so it's like, come at it from a position of curiosity, and it's like, okay, what do I know? What do I know that people might find useful or interesting or entertaining? What can I share with people in a book format, or in a LinkedIn post or whatever, that people might enjoy reading? And it changes everything. It takes all of the pressure off you from having to be this countable knowledge and this expert of 10,000 hours or whatever that saying is. And it's like, okay, well, who can I help? Like, my first book was called Business for Superheroes, and I would not write that book now. I wrote it a very long time ago. My outlook on almost everything has changed since then. Some of the advice that I gave in that book is not advice that I would give now, but when I wrote it, it was true for me and it was helpful for me. And I still have people reading that book and coming back and being like, oh my goodness, this has made such a difference. And so that book, I never pretended to know everything. I wrote it from the point of view of, I've been running my business for a couple of years, and this is how I went from, and it's a bit embarrassed by the subtitle, it's like from whatever to 6 figures in 6 months. And that was my journey. Like, it wasn't 6 months, it was like a couple of years, but then I had 6 months of like focused work. This is what I did to grow my business to 6 figures. And I wasn't pretending that I'd done it forever. I wasn't pretending that I'd made $1 million. I was like, this is what I did in my first couple of years of business. That's all it needed to be. It's like, this isn't like the fount of how to run a business. Like, nobody knows that. It's different. So yeah, reframing it from I need to be the expert to how can I, what do I know that can help people is a bit of a game changer.
That's incredible. I love that concept, because you're right. People do think you have to be the expert in it, and that explains why sometimes I'll read a book and I won't finish it, which I think is I feel uncomfortable not finishing a book. But sometimes I'll read it and be like, oh, I could have written this myself, and then I think, well, why haven't I?
Yeah.
And I think some of it is because I think I have to know everything about a topic, and it feels like you've just given me permission to go, no, you don't. You just have to know a bit more than somebody else, or you have to know something that other people would find interesting and useful.
Yeah, or you have to have your take. I'm just also going to say, don't ever feel guilty about not finishing a book. Life is too short to read books you don't want to finish. There are so many good books in the world. Go and like put it down if you're not enjoying it. Go read something else. But yeah, no, you're quite right. It's like, and it's not just a case of what do I know that somebody else doesn't know. It's like, what's my take on it? And this is so important as well for people from marginalized backgrounds. So like Black people, brown people, gay people, queer people, women, mothers, non-mothers, all of those, but poor people, but people from impoverished background as well. It's like most of the books out there are from wealthy white dudes, and I'm not saying that they're bad books. Some of them are bad books, some of them are very good books, but it's still their lens on the world. And this is part of the reason why I wrote my Don't Eat the Frog book, because that advice, eat the frog, is not bad advice. Like, some people find it very, very useful. For me, it's bad advice for my brain and the way my brain works. So like from my autistic ADHD brain, just is not good advice for me. And the thing that made me angry was the advice was bandied around as, you must do this, and if you don't do this, if it doesn't work, there's something wrong with you. And that made me so mad. And I was like, no, it doesn't work for me. Why is that? And that curiosity is what led me to write that book. And that's why it's so important for people to look at a book, especially if you are different from the author of like the main authors of things like Atomic Habits. Great book, love it. James Clear is a wealthy white dude, and I would like to read that book written by a Black woman, maybe from an impoverished background, And so that is super important as well. It doesn't mean that what you have to say is better than or correct. It's just like, actually, your worldview and your experience of the world is different. And we need to see that, because otherwise all we've got is like this bunch of people saying this is the way you've got to do it. And it's like, well, my life doesn't look like your life. Like, how am I supposed to do that? Physically, it won't work. So yeah, so it's not just the what do you know? It's like, what can you bring to it from your life experience that will help other people to get to where they want to go, which might not necessarily be where you want to go.
I mean, that difference is absolutely key. I mean, it makes me think of a couple of things. First of all, I love a bit of Alice in Wonderland, and I think it's the Cheshire Cat who says, I'm not crazy. My reality is just different than yours, which
Yes.
is a great point. Our realities are all different. And as a Sen parent, you have to kind of bite your tongue, actually, when it comes to things like nutrition and food and screen time, because our world is very, very different from the one that is, that's so-called normal, if there ever is such a thing.
Yeah.
It looks very different, and it has to look different for us to function. There's nothing wrong. It's just different.
Yeah. And the world is different as well. So it's like, in in days of yore, the ADHD kids, the autistic kids, and they would have been treated probably quite badly. But also, there were no screens, and so people were outside playing more. And I would like to see more of that, to be honest. It's like, get outside and play in the woods more. But like, that's not the reality of a lot of people's worlds. It's like, whether we like it or not, we've got those screens. So it's like, if you can write that book or write that piece from that lens and be like, yeah, you know what, it'd be great to be able to be playing in the woods all day every day, but that's just not the reality that we live in now. And so actually, how can we take what we've got and make it optimal? How am I doing that? How are you doing that? How are other people doing that? And kind of looking at it and bringing all of that stuff into it, instead of just being like, prescriptively, this is good, this is bad, this is the way we should be living our lives. And that's just not, because when you've got places like KFC opening shops in impoverished areas and replacing like small markets and greengrocers, and then suddenly people have got to travel further to get healthy food, which they can't afford to do because they don't have a car or they can't afford to public transport. It's so much more nuanced than that, and that's why we really need all of these stories from different people from different walks of life, because otherwise all we get is newspaper sound bites about poor people make bad choices, and it's like, no, like, we make the choices that we have in the frameworks that we've got, and we don't know that unless we can read people's stories and experiences about it. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do and about helping people to write and use their voices, because it literally does change the world, and it changes minds and hearts. Sorry, or soapbox rant.
That's all right. No, I love people getting on a soapbox. It means you're passionate about it. And you also brought up there the topic of stories, because I think stories are absolutely key, aren't they? Nobody wants to be lectured at. No. Nobody wants to be lectured at. But actually, the reason that stories exist is to help impart that information in a digestible format so that we can hear it. Because sometimes if we're told something, you shouldn't believe that, or, X, Y, Z, we can actually defend ourselves against it and go, no, I'm just not even looking at it. But a story, you're much more likely to take on board and assess and bring it into your world.
Yeah, 1000% true. And this is something that, like, I'm totally guilty of this, because when something enrages me, like injustice or something, I do have a bit of a tendency to get on my soapbox and yell about it, which I know it's not a very effective way it's not going to change people's minds. It's going to, like you say, it's going to make them dig their heels in even further. And I think that's a real problem that that people on the kind of more left wing of politics have, is like this tendency to lecture people and to hector people about, oh, this is wrong. And it's not that they're wrong. Like, I'm like, human rights are human rights. It's like, we don't treat that there aren't people who are lesser. But hectoring people it's not a thing that is ever going to change minds. But stories are. And this, like you say, it's like, if you can hear somebody else's story through their words, it's so powerful. And a really good example of this is me talking to an older person in my world who is very conservative and probably pretty racist, because that's the world they grew up in, the life they grew up in. And I remember them telling me about, I think they'd watched the movie 12 Years a Slave, and how that affected them and how it changed their view on like the history of how Black people are treated and all of the rest of it, because they'd suddenly seen how that history has influenced like everything that has come after it. And that was a story. That wasn't a documentary. It wasn't somebody saying, this is what happened. this is what we should do, blah, blah, blah. These are the problems. It was like, this is the story of somebody who lived this life and what they suffered, what they endured, and then how that has affected, the world, and, making those connections. And it's so, yeah, stories are the most powerful. Like, that's how we've always taught and learned. That's why oral traditions were a thing before we learned to write things down, before we invented written language. Was, we had epic poetry and epic songs and poems to remember the things that we needed to remember, that cultural history that was passed down before we could like immortalize it in writing.
So I'm really intrigued to learn more about your book writing coaching technique. So have you ever had, and this has literally just come into my mind now, have you ever had somebody come to you with an idea and you've gone, no, that's just not going to work?
No, I haven't. I have had people come to me with an idea that we've worked together to turn into something that I think would make a better book, or a more effective book. But I've never had someone come and be like, oh, I've got this idea, and I'm like, that's not going to work. Usually it's a case of refining it. Most of the time, the problem is that people will come and they'll be like, oh, I want to write a book about gardening. And it's like, okay, there's 1,000 books about gardening. What's your take on it? And it's like, it's actually that they don't want to write a book about gardening. They want to write a book about organic gardening in a tiny garden, and so it's like it's kind of drilling down into what it is that they really want to write about, and kind of taking that topic and making it smaller. So an example that I always use, because I like the book and he's a nice guy, James Clear's Atomic Habits. It's like, there's loads of books about habits. You could write a book about habits. That's a massive topic. But he took it and he distilled it down into atomic habits, like the tiny, tiny things that make a difference every day that everybody can do. So it wasn't like a big treatise on how our brains work, although there is a little bit of that in there. It was, okay, what's your lens on this, and how are you going to take it and turn it into something that is digestible for people and that you're really, really passionate about? So yeah, to answer your question, it's not that there's ever a bad idea. It's usually an unformed idea, and one that just needs a little bit more thought and clarity. Again, we're back to clarity and kind of digging into it and figuring out, okay, why are you writing this, and where's it going?
So how do you, and I know this is something that I would struggle with because this is part of how I talk, how would you deal with somebody who goes off at tangents a lot? Because the person who goes off at a tangent finds it fantastically interesting, but the person, when you're writing a book, the person reading it might be like, what's going on here?
So that's a really good question. I am also the person who goes off at tangents. And there's a couple of things that you can do. So it depends what the tangent is. So footnotes are a wonderful thing. I love footnotes. I use them to great comic effect, as well as anything else. So like, if you're going off on a little tangent that isn't directly relevant to what you're saying, but you've got a little aside, a footnote is a wonderful way to do it, because it allows you to go off on your tangent without yanking the reader out of the narrative and confusing them. They can kind of, if they want to, go look at the footnote and come back into it. So that's one thing. But if it's a bit more of a kind of serious structural issue, with, I want to talk about, so I've got a book on my bookshelf that one of my clients wrote about. It's called The Big Hairy Green Book of Grass, and he's got an artificial grass company. He's written a book about grass, which is just like, what? How do you do that? And I was intrigued. So, but he's got like the history of lawns and all sorts of interesting stuff, about biodiversity and all that kind of thing. Now, if he was like, oh, I also want to write about patios, it's like, no, that's a separate thing. So, or I want to write about raised beds, or I want to write about window boxes. It's like, that's the kind of tangent that isn't going to add anything to his book, because he's very specifically talking about grasses, lawns, how people use their gardens. And so aside from maybe a mention here and there, he doesn't want to go off on this tangent about patios or window boxes. However, that's not to say that those aren't good ideas. So when people do that, one of my techniques, because we never want to kill our ideas, like they say, kill your darlings. I prefer not to annihilate them. We can just put them in a box for a while. It's like, write those ideas down. When you're having a tangent, write it down, write what you need to, get it out your system, put it in a file for later, because that can form an article or a blog post or maybe another book at some point. I don't know. I think what people worry about with their tangents is, oh, if I don't capture this right now and include it in this my one book, it's going to be lost forever. And there's two problems with that. First of all, nothing's ever lost forever if you kind of write it down and save it somewhere. And second, this doesn't have to be your only book. Like, you're allowed to write more than one. You can write as many as you want. The thing that you're tangenting about might not be worthy of a book in its own right for you. It might be worthy for somebody else, but it's like, maybe this is just a blog post or an article. So get it down, do the writing that your brain wants to do, take it out, put it somewhere else, and like find that discipline to say, okay, this is fine. I've written this. It doesn't belong here. What else can I do with it? And that's where like what I do comes in really helpful, because it's really helpful to have another pair of eyes on it, because we get really attached to the stuff we write. We get really attached to our own ideas, and it was like, oh, this is such a good idea. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But really you need someone to say, is it right for this? I don't think it's right for this. It's not going to add anything to this book. It's going to make it difficult for the reader. Let's take it out. Let's do something else with it. So having that kind of ability to step back and really look back at what you wanted to do with your book, what you wanted it to achieve, where you wanted it to go, and then look at the piece that you've just written, the tangent you've just gone off on, and be like, does this like, if you think of it as a road is probably the simplest way. It's like, does it head off into a cul-de-sac that's going to take you nowhere? If it does, it probably doesn't belong in this book. If it takes you off on a little loop that brings you back to the road, maybe it belongs in the book, and maybe we can do something with that in the structure.
Love that. And one of the reasons that I love that is sometimes I can feel that going off a tangent is a negative, or is a bad habit, or almost there's something wrong with it. But actually, by reframing it that way, going off at a tangent is useful, because you're right, there's something going on in your brain that needs to be got out and put somewhere. And maybe it will be another book, maybe it will be a blog post, maybe it'll be a podcast episode. It might be something. But there's use in the tangents. They're not.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's just popped into my head, that tangential thinking is part of thinking and writing process as well. It's our brains working out what's relevant. What do I need for this narrative? What do I need for this book? Is this has popped into my head? It's popped into my head for a reason. Does it need to be here? I'm going to explore it a bit. So it's also a thinking process. And again, this is linked to this idea of perfectionism, that I don't know why people think this. It's like, nobody writes a published book. It's like a lot of the books that you see on your shelves, like the really famous ones, I'm thinking like William Golding, for example. He wrote Lord of the Flies, and I just was hearing about him on a podcast yesterday, which is why he popped into my head. But like, he had an editor who is as much a part of the creative process of creating his books as William Golding was. William Golding had the original ideas, but the editor helps to pull all of that into shape. And so his first drafts probably were very different from what ended up as the final draft, because it would have gone through lots of rounds of editing, lots of iterations, I know we're talking about fiction here, but the principle is the same. Lots of plot holes that you couldn't write himself out of. And we write ourselves into corners all the time, and that's where the tangents come from. It's like, oh, I've written myself into a corner there, do I need it? Maybe I can take bits of it, but actually that whole thing doesn't belong. Cool, now I'm clearer on what I'm doing with my whole book. So rather than thinking of tangents as a bad thing or a problem, just think of it as part of the creative process, because we're working out what we want to say and how we want to say it. And no amount of planning and plotting in the world we can make that not happen, because there's always going to be new ideas that pop into our heads as we're creating what we're creating.
That's so incredibly helpful. And I love the fact that you talk about it being almost like a team effort, because a lot of us will have these ideas that we have, of authors. I mean, maybe this is what my plan, in an attic flat in Paris, writing away at our masterpiece, and there's only ever one draft, and it's just not like that at all, is it?
No, and it's most books are not created alone either. And like, even I'm probably thinking of Victor Hugo in his attic in Paris with his hair shirt, and he gave all his belongings away, so he had to meet a deadline. And so that part of the writing is always solitary. There's always a solitary aspect to it, but books are never created in isolation. So Victor Hugo would have been talking to his mates, and he would have been going out, and he would have been experiencing things, and he probably would have been having conversations about his stories, definitely with his publisher, who was badgering him to get the thing done. And that's the same with, not everybody writes in collaboration, but there is always collaboration with writing a book. You're going to have an editor. You're going to, even if you put it through, this is a use of AI that I find very useful, is helping me to go through my drafts and kind of structure what I'm writing. That's collaboration. You know, I will send it to beta readers. I'll send my books to beta readers and be like, can you read this? Here are the things that I want to know. How can you help me make it better? That's collaboration. And, you know, none of what I create is created in isolation. I don't live in a cave like a hermit. So whatever people think about, you know, I made this thing by myself. It's like, no, you didn't. You didn't. Nobody's taken away your hard work from it, but let's not claim that we're doing it all by ourselves, because we're not.
I love that, because we build up stories in our minds, don't we? We create narratives around what it's going to be like, and then that's probably another reason why we don't do it, because we think, well, I don't have time to lock myself away in a garret in Paris to create this masterpiece. Well, actually, no, you don't, but that's not how it works anyway.
No, a lot of those stories come from a time when when writers were independently wealthy. You're thinking about Virginia Woolf, who is an amazing person and writer, who was awesome. She wrote A Room of One's Own, also like a great, you know, everybody should have a room of one's own. Not everybody does. Walt Whitman used to go to his cabin in the woods. I don't know how wealthy he was, but he was wealthy enough to be able to go to a cabin in the woods whenever he wanted. So a lot of these stories about what writers are and, you know, should be, they come from a time when writing was, you know, when writers were lauded as being amazing, which is great, and we are, like, writers are amazing, all writers are amazing. But like it was different. Like the lower classes didn't generally write. A lot of the stuff that survived from history, from literature, until fairly recent times, was not the stories of the lower classes, because nobody had time to write. You know, they were struggling to scrape together a living, and feed themselves and their families. They were malnourished because they couldn't afford it. You know, they were dying of preventable diseases. So the stuff that has survived and the stories about how we write that have survived have come from the ruling classes, the people who had the time and space because everybody else was doing the work for them. And that's not to say that what they wrote wasn't great. It was in a lot of cases, but like how they did it is not how most people lived. And it's really, really important to keep that in mind.
That's such a good point. What tips would you give people who are listening to this and thinking, I'm now in mind to write a book, or now I actually feel inspired and encouraged, and I think I can do it after listening to Vicky and Julia's conversation about book writing? Now actually I realise it possibly is an attainable, you know, let's get rid of possibly. It's an attainable goal. What are your tips for people who are listening thinking that?
Yay! First of all, yay! If you're listening and thinking that, then yay! Literally anybody can write a book. Most people won't. I'm just going to put that out there now. Most people won't. That's fine. So my first tip is really consider why you want to do it, because if you haven't got a why that's going to drive you through, you are not going to finish, because writing a book is really hard. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you can write a book in a weekend and it's really super easy, because it's not. That's not true. There are people out there who will tell you that. They are either misguided or they are lying to you to make the money. So yeah, it's going to be hard. It's going to be long. There are going to be times when you want to set fire to the whole thing and never look at it again. So you really need to have a good reason for doing it. And your reason might be, I want to change the world and eradicate poverty, which is amazing. But equally, it might be, you know what, I just want to write a book to say that I've done it. And if that is a strong enough driver for you, then that will get it done. And I'm not here to judge your reason for writing your book, but it has to be a meaningful reason to you, and it has to come from inside you. Because quite often I do talk to people who are like, oh, my mentor said I should write a book and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, but do you want to? Because, I've turned people away from working with me as a coach because their main reason was, I've been told that I should do this as part of my marketing or whatever. And I know that their heart's not really in it. It's like, I'm going to find it really difficult to help you, because you're going to get to the point where you don't want to do this anymore. And I also don't want to just be helping people to write tick box books as well. So really think about why you want to write it and how important it is to you. Next thing is think about who it's for. That's really, really important. I think quite a lot of the time we dive into writing and we don't really have a clear idea of who it's for to go with that why. And that makes it really difficult to have that direction and keep that focus. So who is it for? If it's for like your past self, perfect, that's fine. Like that's what my first book was for. In fact, that's what my How the Hell Do You Write a Book was for me, the me that had never written a book before. and that's perfectly reasonable as well. And you can talk to other people obviously and see how things have changed, but like, who are you writing it for? Be really clear on that. And then your idea, third main tip is your idea. Make it really, really, really specific, because one of the biggest problems is people have this vague idea of like, oh, I'm a marketing consultant and I want to write about marketing. Good luck with that. Marketing's a massive topic. So really, really narrow it down be super specific, because you can always widen it out a little bit later if you get like partway through the book or the plan or the outline or whatever, and you're like, actually, I'd like to widen this a bit. Cool, but start really, really, really specific on that one thing that you could talk about for like an hour until people don't want to listen to you anymore. That's probably the thing that you want to start thinking about writing your book.
I mean, I could talk to you all day, Vicky. There's so much interesting content that you have there. I have a million questions, but they're actually about me, not about the people listening. Obviously, I'll put all this in the show notes. How can people get in touch with you, find out more about you, learn what you do?
I am on LinkedIn most days, Vicky Quinn Fraser. You can just pop that in. I think I'm the only one. I was going to say I've got blue hair, but I'm going to have some more headshots taken, so that'll probably change, so ignore that. I've got my website, moxiebooks.co.uk, and I have an email list, which you should definitely get on. So I'll give you the link for that to put in the show notes. I send out twice weekly emails on a Tuesday and a Friday, and they are known to be the best emails on the internet. That's not true, that's just me saying that. They are good. People like them. And yeah, I think that's the main places. But yeah, if people are wanting to write a book, I run my MicroBook Magic twice a year. The next one is starting in April 2025, so I don't know when this is going out, but it'll be happening again in autumn 2025. And I also run like micro workshops every month. Actually, they're very affordable. They're 45 minutes, and you'll learn a quick skill to take away with you.
Thank you. Well, I can definitely recommend the email list. They're because you subscribe to millions of newsletters and stuff, and a lot of them I don't read. I read yours all the way to the end, because it makes me laugh and it makes me smile, and I learn something as well. And I have been on one of your workshops and I absolutely loved it. And what I think is key is I remember the stuff that you taught me in that. And I always know if I've been on good training that's been worthwhile is, do I remember what I've been taught? And I absolutely remember what you taught me. So I can highly recommend your workshops.
Yay, I'm really excited to hear that. Thank you.
Yes, sadly I can't make the next one, but I will definitely be coming to the one after that. So fantastic. It's been an absolute joy to speak to you, Vicky. I've loved every second of it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Julia. This has been a delight. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As well as producing this podcast, The Dynamics of Everyday Life has lots more psychodynamic fun going on, and you can find out more at dynamicsofeveryday.life.